Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It is a lovely, warm August morning here in suburban Chicago. It's August 18th, and boy, it's been quite a while since I talked to you. Probably a week, maybe more. It's been a robust and crazy time since last time we chatted. So I thought I'd share a little of the exciting story of what's gone on lately. I mean, it's not really that exciting. So Monday afternoon, we had a fairly robust and vigorous thunderstorm that swept through the Midwest. It really only rained for about an hour. But in doing so, it took out a whole bunch of power lines and all around. It was so busy, took out so many power lines that I actually wasn't even able to get through to the power company for a whole day. I mean, I was able to go into their system and register that our power was out, but that was it. I was not able to get an estimate. I was not able to log into my account. Nothing. All I could do is give them the address and say the power was out. So we spent most of Monday afternoon. Anytime the power's gone out before, it's never been out for more than like 4 or 5 hours around here. So we spent the afternoon and evening waiting for the power to come back on. It did not. So bright and early the next morning, I went to the grocery store and bought 4 20-pound bags of ice. And I put a bunch of ice in a bowl in our refrigerator and then just jammed the freezers. We have a chest freezer in the basement and a regular freezer. Jammed those full of ice to keep them cold. They actually had stayed pretty cold. We did lose some ice cream, but otherwise it was fine. But then we're sitting around the house, no power, and we all had to work. So my a buddy of mine who lives about 20 minutes away, Paul, I've mentioned him before, invited us to come over and spend the day at his house where he had power. So that's what we did. We took the kids and our laptops and went over to his house. And I did end up playing games mostly instead of working. I did a little work, but mostly just checking my email. And finally got through to the website to indicate when the power would come back on. And it said their estimate was going to be Friday, like 4 more days away. And I was like, oh no. So we were sort of hunkering down for a really long time without power. And then when we got home late afternoon, we came home to feed the rabbit and check on the house and so on. The power was back on. So it ended up really only being off for like 24 hours, 26 hours, something like that. Which, I know there are some people who went days without power, so we got pretty lucky that way. We do live on a street right near a nursing home, so it's possible that our street got some priority because of the people of ill health who'd be up the street. Well, whatever it is, thank goodness for power line technicians who spend, I'm sure, sleepless and tiring nights trying to figure out how to fix the power grid when it goes down. So that was the first couple days of my week. And then when the power came back on, we talked to my in-laws and had them reschedule their trip that they had been considering not coming because the power was off, but now it's back on. So they came and I spent all day Thursday, all day Friday, all day Saturday, and all day Sunday tearing the top of my deck off and resurfacing the front deck on our house. I'm not totally done yet. I still have quite a bit of work to do, actually. So I'm going to need to do a couple hours a day till that's done. But it did, we did get started. So, whew. Needless to say, all that meant I didn't get to take any walks and record podcasts for you, and I missed talking to you all. So here I am. So today's episode, I thought I would talk about a couple new games I did get to try, because after it got too dark to work on the porch, I would come inside and my mother-in-law would excitedly say, "Hey, ready for a game?" And even though I was generally pretty exhausted physically by then, mentally I was like, "Yeah, let's play some games." So we played some games. We did take another stab at Buffy the Vampire the board game and a couple other or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the board game, and a couple other games. But that isn't really the game I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about were 3 new games I got to try in last week. That's right. Today is a Shootin' from the hip triple shot. If anybody is new to the podcast, you won't have heard this before, but I do these episodes. It's probably my most regular segment because I really enjoy just giving a quick impression of the games I've played. But like I said, this is a first impression, so it's not a review. It's just I played this game once or maybe twice, and I'm responding quickly, i.e. shooting from the hip. And the triple shot means I'm talking about 3 games today that I hadn't played before. So the first of these was a game I played like an hour after the power came on. We got home 6:15, and at 7 p.m. my weekly game group online game was hosted by my pal Rob, and that was a game of Patchwork Doodle. Patchwork is, of course, a well-known tetromino game or polyomino game from Uwe Rosenberg. Patchwork Doodle is a sort of roll and write version of that game, in which you're still selecting tiles from a circle with a little piece moving around, but instead of moving the piece yourself and collecting buttons and whatnot, instead you're choosing the best way to lay out the pieces that you've selected based on this little piece moving around. You get a couple little bonus powers that let you flex your choices slightly, and your goal is to make the biggest square within I think it's an 11 by 11 grid is the whole thing that you can. I really enjoyed my first play. We played twice during the Toggle Online game. The way we play online is the host sets up a camera view and a regular view, and then everybody can see the screen, and you go from there. So I really enjoyed playing that game. I guess I should explain how it works. So there's a series of tetromino pieces, which are or polyomino pieces, which are these little shapes, kind of like in the game Tetris, only sometimes they're more than 4 squares or less than 4 squares. And they're in a circle, and there's a pawn, and each turn the pawn moves forward 1, 2, or 3 spaces, and then you as a player have to draw the shape that it's landed on your board. You can draw it any way you like. You can flip it over. It doesn't have to be connected to the previous pieces, as far as I could tell. It's possible that I missed that rule, in which case I'm a cheater. But generally you are building out a quilt. It's like you're building a quilt or planning a quilt. There are 3 scoring phases, and then that piece is removed from the little circle. The pawn moves around until 6 of the 8 pieces have been selected, and then you score. And the way you score is that you draw the biggest you draw a rectangle, a completely filled in rectangle in your shape or in your board, and then within that rectangle you draw the biggest square you can. And you get 1 point for every space in the square, and 1 additional point for each row on the longer side of the rectangle. So if you draw a rectangle that's 5 by 7, you'd get 25 points for the 5 by 5 square, and 2 more points for the other 2 rows or columns in the rectangle. So thus, there's often times when you might have a big rectangle in one direction or a square in another. So you could have, I know it happened to more than one person where they had at one point, like say a 5 by 9 rectangle or a 6 by 6 square. And a 6 by 6 square is better than the 5 by 9 rectangle. So you do that 3 times, each time the board getting more and more full. And after the third scoring opportunity, the game is over. You add up your points. You lose a point for each. I think you lose a point for each square that isn't filled in. And then you find out how you did. It was really fun. We played it twice. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I won the second game. I'm not sure how I did the first game because my internet reset in the middle of the play because, the power grid was still pretty shaky. But I had a good time. So that's Patchwork Doodle from Uwe Rosenberg. How it compares to the original Patchwork? I like the original Patchwork better, I think. As a roll and write, it's fine, but it's not really anything compelling. I didn't like it enough to go buy it, for instance. I feel like the placing of tetraomino or polyomino pieces, I get my pleasure from playing cartographers with that particular set of rules, so I don't think I need another game that does that same thing. The second game I want to talk about was a late addition to my shelf of opportunity last month. It's called The King's Armory. This was given to me by my friend Paul. He thought it looked like the kind of game I would enjoy playing with my son. And the short answer is, it is. This is a 1995 Kickstarter game with a really hefty rule book that could definitely use some organization. But the idea is it's a tower defense game. You have these towers and you have warriors who have to stay. You have warriors and then you have hirelings. And the hirelings have to stay within a certain distance of the tower, and each tower can only support 3 of them. The warriors can range around the board, and they have more support, or they don't need the tower support. Each one has an attack characteristic and a defense characteristic and all sorts of different stuff. And basically it is a board game version of a tower defense game. So the enemies come marching in waves, and you have to arrange your defenses in a way that you will kill the enemies as they move through the board. The enemies they will attack you, but their mission is to destroy the castle, so they won't stop to attack you. They will march through, attack you if you're in range when they have finished their movement, but ultimately their goal is to move toward the castle and destroy it. It's the sort of game where once you've played a couple times, it could play fairly quickly, but on the first play it was really clunky and took a very long time. So we actually only played 2 waves, and then we put it away because we had already used 2 hours, and the game has 5 waves. But it definitely would be a fun game to play over an afternoon with my son and Paul. My daughter did not enjoy it very much. It's deterministic in interesting ways. No, they're still rolling. Yeah, that's right. Every time you attack, you're rolling a d20 and you're adding numbers. So it varies wildly in terms of the level of success you can have. But for all that, it was pretty amusing, and I liked the system. The graphic design is not good. In particular, the enemies have these tokens on them with icons and numbers, and they're so small. The children were able to read them just fine, but I could not. So next time we play, I may bring my table magnifying glass, which would help significantly, I think. And I haven't had to do that very often in games, although I guess as I get older, I will have to more, probably. But it's an interesting game. There was a lot of love put into it, obviously. Lots of amusing art. It was fun looking at all the different names of the hirelings and the heroes. The children enjoyed sort of deciding who they were going to be. The game is relatively easy to understand sort of once you've understood it, but the rulebook needs a lot of work, and it's way too long. It's like 64 pages long and not super well organized. So definitely a game we're going to play again, at least a couple times, I think, because my son did really like it. So it might be a game he and I will play, or we'll invite Paul over and the 3 of us can play it sometime. But we have to find a time that will work. So that is The King's Armory. If you get a chance to play it, and that sounds like your kind of game, honestly, if you enjoy the Flying Frog games, like Last Night on Earth or A Touch of Evil, this game feels similar in terms of very complicated a fun dice chucker, neat theme, fun to look at on the table, but not really very strategically deep. Although there are a lot of choices for what hirelings you might get and what choices you might make about how to arrange your pieces. We just didn't get into the flow of the game well enough to really understand it, or to really play it well. So that is The King's Armory. I don't remember the publisher or the designer. Apologies if you're listening. And finally, the third game I'm talking about today on today's Shootin' from the Hip Triple Shot is a Grail game of mine. As I may have mentioned a few times here on the podcast, I am a Titaniac, meaning a person who is fascinated with the lore of the Titanic, the famous steamship, probably the world's most famous steamship, which hit an iceberg and sunk in 1912 on its maiden voyage, killing 1,300 people or so. There are a number of board games that use the Titanic as a theme. I have one called Titanic, which is a roll and move game that is not good. I have one called The Sinking of the Titanic, which I have not played, but I really should. It's from the 70s and it has a board that moves, and it has a two-phase thing where you're supposed to pack up your escape boat, and then you're supposed to go around to islands on your escape boat, which doesn't make any sense, but there it is. And then there's a game I've been looking for a long time, and I finally was able to get a hold of it. I paid about half the market rate, which I paid $50 for it. It's a small card game, but like I said, it's hard to get a hold of. And it was $50 instead of $100 because I got the German version. The English version would have run me about $100 on Board Game Geek or on eBay, probably. This one, it was nice. I got it at my local game shop. So I was buying it. They have a thing where you can put a used game up, and there's a consignment element where the person selling the game gets store credit, and then the store takes a cut. The game is called S.O.S. Titanic. It's by Bruno Cathala and Ludovic Montblanc. It is a sort of more gamified version of Klondike Solitaire, which is the solitaire game, or Patience is the other name of that game. It's where you line up rows of cards and you have to move the cards around so they're in numerical order, and then you're offloading them into a safe area. And basically what it is it's a simplified version of that Klondike. There's only two suits. There's steerage and there's first class, and then there's these lifeboats. And so your goal is to move the passengers around and get them onto lifeboats before the boat sinks. And every time you fail to do something, or every time the deck runs out, you turn the page, and the top of the game is this book, which starts with a picture of the Titanic just after it hit the iceberg. And each time you turn the page, the Titanic sinks lower at the bow, which if you haven't, the Titanic sank by the bow. So as it gets lower, then you lose lifeboat spots, and they've got this great mechanic where the people panic. So the people who are in line to get lifeboats get on a lifeboat at the front of the ship, if you haven't gotten them all on lifeboats by the time that part of the ship floods, then they panic and they run backwards, and you lose your next line too. So all the people who were in the first line, you take that whole line of cards and turn them all face down, and then you take the whole next line of cards, turn them all face down, shuffle them all together, and make a new line. So as the game goes along, it gets harder and harder to succeed because the people keep panicking and going back one spot in the line, and that line gets bigger and bigger, meaning more and more cards are kind of trapped in that spot. It's a great mechanism. It works really well. And then you have a bunch of cards. You have a crew member who has a special power. There's a bunch of action cards that'll let you manipulate various things. You can pull someone out of the line. You can dig in the deck for a card. You can dig in the discard for a card. And basically what you're looking for is to get as many people on the lifeboat as you can. In the instruction book it says if you earn 19 points, then you did as well as the crew of the actual Titanic did. My first game I earned 5 points. So, yikes. Apparently it is possible to save everybody, but I suspect hard. On a first play, really fun. an interesting game, very compelling mechanism, and I'm looking forward to playing it a bunch more. It does suffer from the big problem of Klondike Solitaire in general, which is that you can have cards get stuck in the stack and you can't get to them. There are plenty of ways to mitigate that, and as I play a few more times, I will learn how those work. But on a first play, that was my first instinct. But a really neat game, interesting and exciting to play. I'm looking forward to trying it again. Also, designed to be easily played solo. So, of course, I'm enjoying playing it solo. All right. Well, that's about it for me today. What games have you been playing since last we talked? It's been a while. I look forward to hearing from you. And until next time, I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by
Rattlebox Games.